Those cupcakes are something else for sure. She goes all like, way above and beyond for all those baked goods.
I know.
What do you think of that TARDIS cookie jar?
I love it. It's just like ours at home.
So where are you from?
Texas. Yeah, the Dallas area. I grew up in a suburb of Dallas, and now I live in another suburb of Dallas and work in another suburb of Dallas.
Oh, great.
So I'm kind of orbiting the Metroplex area.
Does that affect you getting in with Funimation? The fact you're in Texas?
Yep.
Sure.
Yep. A lot of work at Funimation, so I
definitely. For Romeo x Juliet, what did you do? I know you voiced William.
Voiced William. I was also I was also co-director, co-ADR director, along with our Bruce Elliott, the gentleman who also played Conrad on the show, and we got to work on that. Taliesin Jaffe and Patrick Seitz and a handful of other writers, from LA worked on the scripts, which were wonderful. And Romeo, we're starting with that. That's awesome. That makes my day. I love talking about that show.
I'm really big into Shakespeare right now. I'm taking class. I'm like,
good on you. Shakespeare's my boy.
Yeah, really
love
enjoyable.
Shakespeare.
I love Much Ado About Nothing. That is my favorite. What's your favorite?
I can't pick a favorite. I can't pick a favorite. It's one of those things where it depends on. I mean. Oh man, you've opened up a can of worms talking about Shakespeare. They should have warned you. Shakespeare is really a big part of who I am, I think, and that doesn't. By no means am I an expert. I don't think anyone's an expert on Shakespeare.
Kind of hard to be.
But I mean, I think as comedies go, I love Much Ado About Nothing and Twelfth Night. It's kind of a toss-up between those because they're both just so exuberant in the language and it's Much Ado About Nothing is just kind of Shakespeare writing at the limit of language and just seeing how far he can bend it and not make it break. And even so, who cares? Let's break it because it's Shakespeare. Language is exploding. Why not? Let's invent words. I love it. I think it's great. And Twelfth Night has just got this wonderful manic energy, and it's just strange. One minute you're laughing, and the next you're like, oh my god, that's so sadomasochistic. What they're doing to that poor guy. Like you don't like Malvolio, but man, he goes through hell by the end of it. Those are my favorite comedies, I guess. I mean, my God, Hamlet for God's sakes, King Lear, Othello, Antony and Cleopatra, like the really high tragedies. Those are really good ones, and they're plays. I mean, I don't know if you're just discovering Shakespeare, like coming into it, or where he's kind of always been there and now you're getting it. But like the one thing you begin learning, especially if you really kind of just come at him with an open mind and let Shakespeare teach you how to read Shakespeare rather than listening to other jerks that really don't know what they're talking about half the time, but put their own spin on it without much thought. You kind of learn that this weird magic has happened with Shakespeare, that we're all kind of living inside of the rhetoric he created. So it's like we can't really see it sometimes. He's so far out ahead of us, kind of inventing the human, as it were, that it's hard to kind of really know what you're seeing. Like his ironies are so large that they're invisible, which is a quote from C.K. Chesterton, I think. But now I'm getting very, very literary, and I'll stop being a nerd for a moment.
It's not. But yeah, I love we're all nerds here. It's perfectly okay. I'm just more or less getting into Shakespeare now, but at this point I'm reading just like the classics and the staples. So I just got past Much Ado About Nothing. I'm currently reading Tempest, which I have to do after this.
Oh, I love The Tempest.
I wish my teacher wasn't imposing such like strict like. My class is weird, and we're also like studying the films that are based on the original works. And so like there's some adaptations pretty good. The Romeo and Juliet one with Leonardo DiCaprio, interesting choice.
Yeah,
it's a little silly.
I'm not a fan of that one.
I mean, what do you think of the original Romeo and Juliet? Do you really enjoy that one?
The original film, the Zeffirelli film,
the original work of the play.
Oh, I love it. I think it's I think it's a shame that it's taught in high school. I think. And I say that not that I think that teenagers are any less likely to be able to get Shakespeare, but Romeo and Juliet is a particularly thorny play if you're a teenager, because a teenager wants to look at that love story and see something very different than what is actually there, I think, and you get kind of trapped in this interpretation that really has no place to go when you're that young, because when you're that young, I think you identify so strongly with Romeo. In that people tend to overlook actually what an enormously strong character Juliet actually is, which is really, I mean, as plays go, Romeo and Juliet's a fairly early one for him, and it was his first attempt at this sort of romantic star-crossed lovers tragedy, which was such a prevalent theme in that era. And it's a good play. It's a very good play. It's by no means his best, or even really approaching his best work. But it does. You can see echoes, or not. I shouldn't say echoes. You can still see echoes of Romeo and Juliet in the really great works that were to come, especially in Antony and Cleopatra. But Cleopatra, one of the greatest characters to grace the stage, or to just to exist, period, in any genre or format, owes a lot to his experiment with Juliet. And but I think teachers, you know, trying to get young people in high school especially, or junior high, into Shakespeare, start with Romeo and Juliet because they want them to relate to it, and they think, well, what teenager can't relate to loving someone you can't have? And that's a wonderful place to start, but the play is only partially about that, the unrequited love. It's about many other things besides, and I think the problem with approaching Romeo and Juliet from such a young age is that you do get trapped in a very particular read that is very visceral for you when you're young, but you never get beyond that because you always remember a very specific feeling you got from it. And does that make sense?
Yeah, no. And in high school, they only focus more or less on the context. They don't actually, they don't touch his wordplay. Oh my God.
They don't, and it's brilliant.
That's,
I mean, he kind of invented modern English.
Oh my God.
Really.
Shakespeare has so many, like, he's the first person to ever use the term "doing it."
Yes.
That is one of the greatest things to me.
Nice, nicely done.
But did you think that the show Romeo and Juliet did it justice?
I thought, you know, I have to say, I'm very picky about my Shakespeare, but I also understand. I'm never, when an interpretation comes, like we were talking about various films, like the Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
Well, it's not his film. It's Baz Luhrmann. Who directed it, of course, so it's his fault. That's unkind of me to say. There are things about the film to recommend it, but overall, I think it's just not my cup. I'm just not the audience for that interpretation. Is the fair thing to say.
No idea who it is.
But I think I went for a period. You do this in life. You know, when you become very protective of Shakespeare, particularly when you're first kind of absorbing him. And so, you know, no one can touch him. Just no one knows what they're doing. How dare you? You know, you become the equivalent. If I may bring this into anime for a moment, you become the equivalent of a dub hater who just hates dubs because they're dubs, who won't give them their fair day in court. But it's not the Japanese, so it equals suck. And so you feel this way about Shakespeare because when you're young, you're like, but you know, even Shakespeare anticipated that. But in the famous speech, you know, here we are, a young man full of strange oaths, and you know, where you just, it's this bizarre thing that happens when you're young that you just have to be the loudest guy in the room, and that means hating everything that isn't what you already know. And so. I used to do that with Shakespeare, as though he needed me to protect him. You know, as though anybody, even Baz Luhrmann, with all his color and pomp, is any threat to Shakespeare whatsoever. You know, he can make a worse film than Romeo and Juliet, and it's not going to hurt the bard at all. So I'm lucky I came at Romeo and Juliet, the anime, with that in mind, because it kind of, I'm like, oh yeah, this will be fun. So yes, they take a lot of liberties. A lot of liberties. But what I really loved about it, and what Taliesin Jaffe and Patrick Seitz and the team of writers, I think, really ran with was, we're going to make this a sort of love letter to Shakespeare and what he means to us as actors and writers. Because I don't care who you are and whether you're conscious of it or not, if you're an actor or a writer or in any creative profession that involves language, you are indebted to the bard. He is your great-great-grandfather, and you would not be where you are without him. And I think Taliesin really consciously went, let's make it as Shakespearean as possible. Let's throw in quotes. Let's do this kind of Shakespearean wordplay when we can. Always, of course, being true to the vision of the creators, the animators themselves. But it's you know, anything inspired by the bard has hope. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it was really fun, and at first I was skeptical because I'm like, okay, yes, you've got Neo Verona, the floating city, but you know, why not? Why not? Give me a good reason why not. There's none. It's Shakespeare. He can sustain any number of conflicting interpretations, and he will never ever thwart or get to the bottom of what he's trying to say. I mean, he's so expansive and so amazing. As I said earlier, so far out ahead of us that we will never catch up. So just play in the wake of him. Why not? You know, that's what's left to us, and that's what he encourages us to do. And though, man, I'm telling you, when you get Shakespeare, you have a bunch of voice actors that don't often get to do this kind of thing in the booth. Man, the idea of getting in there and getting to just chew on Shakespearean language just brought out the best in everybody. It's like going back to the source, you know? It was really cool. It was really great. And while I was working on that, Bruce Elliott and myself kind of reached this agreement that we had so much fun and it was so rewarding working with everyone on this, the writers, the engineers, the directors, or the actors rather, that if I could wake up every day for the rest of my life and be working on that show, I would be a very happy man. But sadly, all things must come to an end, especially Romeo and Juliet, and we all know how it ends.
Oh, no spoilers. No spoilers.
If you've taken freshman English, you know how it ends.
Even without reading it, you know how it ends. Star-Crossed Lovers kind of sums it up right there.
Exactly.
What did you think of the fact that they put Shakespeare in Romeo x Juliet?
I'm very glad they did, because I think it gave him. I mean, I got to play him, and I didn't want to play him because directing the show, I didn't want to be in it. It's very difficult directing yourself, and I don't particularly like doing it. But Bruce Elliott was like, "Well, I'll direct you. You do it," because we tried him out, and I'm like, and I just had a voice that just Bruce really loved for him, and so I did it. And first, I was terrified because I'm like, "This is really I'm playing Shakespeare, like." Granddaddy Shakespeare, and I'm pretty sure, as much fun as I had playing him, that if the real Shakespeare were to materialize in front of me right now in flesh and blood, he would probably punch me in the crotch for that performance, because it's so foppish and over the top. But yet he has these moments that are very profound and very quiet when he's just sort of, saying, "I don't hack from the hands hall," sort of thing, and so it was really fun to get to play with that. And I think the character of William in the show is kind of it plays the part of the narrator. He's got equivalent to like the narrator in many of Shakespeare's own plays, such as the narrator in Henry V and things like that. So it was kind of fun to have the bard become his own character, because that's something he never did in his own writing. Yeah. You can't really locate Shakespeare anywhere in his own works, and that's part of the fun. But so it was kind of nice that we've kind of addressed that imbalance. The animators in Japan and the original Seiyu and everything kind of was like, well, let's put Shakespeare in one of his own plays and just see what the hell happens. And it was really fun and interesting.
Turned out well.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
I think you did a pretty good job. And overall, the production on it's really good for the entire show. And so you did a really good job overall. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I can definitely tell from listening to the dubs, because I prefer them over the subs, which is a little bit rare for me. I kind of flip-flop on that, but your team really cared about it, and that we did. We really did. It was hard not to care about it. Yeah. So you're really big into literature. So like, what kind of stuff do you read besides Shakespeare?
Oh God, quite a lot of things. You're probably going to call shenanigans on this, and you're more than welcome to. But I probably read about 12 books a week. Okay, 11. Right.
Okay. 12? No way.
It depends. Well, I'm a compulsive reader. I have to read all the time when I'm not doing something else like sleeping or eating or whatever. And if I can do it and read at the same time, that's usually me as well. I mean, traveling to this convention, as busy as I am and as social as I like to be, I still have like 5 books with me, and I'll read through most of them, before I get, before the plane ride home. So I read all kinds of things. I mean, I love to read. I love really dense, very intellectual literature. Where I mean, because of Shakespeare, I'm always very fond of writers who like to bend the language and like to push it into new heights, because to treat it like a game and see how much meaning you can generate from language. How to just sort of push the envelope or really just squeeze the last drop of possible meaning out of it. I love it, and so I read a lot of artistic literature. So I love some of my favorite authors. I love. Modern authors, I love Iris Murdoch. I love not so modern authors. I love Jane Austen, who of course is I think the female equivalent of Shakespeare writing in novel form. I love Virginia Woolf. Several of her books are among my favorites. I love a book, and it is my goal to read it in its original tongue, French, one day. But Marcel Proust's À la recherche du temps perdu, which is translated as Remembrance of Things Past, which is this giant, for want of a better word, Shakespearean 6-volume work that is like over 14 million words long. The opening chapter is like 40 pages describing a guy tossing and turning in bed, but yet you inhabit. The style is such of Proust's writing that you just inhabit the consciousness of these characters in ways that are you almost blush. I mean, it's just hard to describe. It's a visceral experience where you literally become those characters. Having said that, I prefer now, because now that it doesn't matter what age you are, but we kind of all of us have to read against the clock. I could live for 5 lifetimes and never ever not read a fraction of the books that I want to read. So now I no longer read books that have been made into a film. And that's not to say that such books aren't really good or don't have the potential to be good. It's just I have to have some arbitrary arbitrary criterion to get me to the books I want to read, you know, and I'm now only interested in reading books that can only be books. They may make a film that's kind of related to the book, or a film that's a meditation upon the book, but I want to read a book that can, and just as movies, I want to see a movie that can only be a movie. Yeah. You know, I want to see, there's been this really, if I can be an old curmudgeon for a second and say, there's been this trend in the past, 15, 20 years of popular literature. I don't even think literature is the right word, but popular novels where they're essentially scripts written in third person. You know, they are all action and dialogue, and there's no inwardness to them. You don't inhabit the characters the way you do in say, the 19th century novels, which is probably the best the English language has ever gotten with the form, where you just, you know, you're inside of these characters' heads, you're reading their thoughts, and their thoughts become your own, and you absorb them in a way that you can't do if you're just watching it as you would watch a scene in a film.
Yeah.
So I'm reading books now that are only books that can't be brought to film because they are essentially bookish in nature and resist any translation into other forms.
Yeah, no, there are some that really just don't. Like, for me, Fear and Loathing, it's a very quick read, but at the
Yes.
same time, the movie was good in its own right, but
Movie's wonderful.
there's so much going on inside his head, and it just does not work as well.
Yeah. And I don't mean to suggest that the movies that are based on books aren't really wonderful for themselves, but they are good as movies. There is their own separate thing. They happen to just be sort of inspired by the book. But, you know, time is working against me, so I have to be like, fine, if it's been made into a movie, I'm not going to read it. I'll just watch the movie, or I'll read the book and I won't watch the movie, but I won't do both anymore. I've got to just, I want, you know, I have to choose. It's totally arbitrary and totally grouchy of me, but I have to do it because, by God, I've just got too much to read and there's not enough time.
I like the Asimov's robot series. That's one that I need to get around to reading. I saw the Will Smith movie, and I know that's like one small little story in the entire grand works of it.
Yeah.
I know they've made like several movies. They made Bicentennial Man based on that, and AI.
Asimov's a great guy. He was a really important 20th century figure, actually, and not a lot of people know this about him, but he was an encyclopedist as well. I mean, he, apart from also writing a lot of great foundational sci-fi literature that kind of set the tone for the genre as a whole, he also he wrote and compiled many different encyclopedias on the ranges of knowledge that was available in the latter half of the 20th century. He's got there's an encyclopedia. There's Isaac Asimov's The Bible, which is a meditation on all religious scholarship at the time devoted to Christianity. Not always a very favorable appraisal of it either, because it's Asimov, but it's fantastic work of scholarship. He's also got one on physics and on all sorts of things. So he was really a leading intellectual of his day. Asimov. Oh,
I really do like classic literature that holds up well with time. Like Shakespeare's definitely held up. I don't know, partially I think because there's really no details in like settings and things like that. He's very vague because it's scripts.
Yeah.
And so I think that opens up for a lot of interpretation. So that kind of leads you.
Absolutely.
You
It focuses on the eternal things, the things that will always be part of the human condition.
Absolutely.
You know, not what they're wearing or you know the cut of this person's dress or that person's hat. You know, I mean, if they're ever evoked, it's in a way that still is funny now because it's easy to, because what he's using it to evoke is still with us.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's all good art is timeless in that way, by focusing on the sort of things that are beneath and behind and that support the outward trappings that change from era to era.
Yeah.
And Shakespeare and he kind of invented that, really. That approach to expression is really Shakespeare's child.
Did you bring books with you to NDK?
Yes, I have. Oh my God, what am I working on now? Let's see, what did I bring with me? I'm rereading a Robert Silverberg novel that I'm really very fond of. He's a fantasy and sci-fi author that is actually very Shakespearean in his approach to character and his elan for language. It's a book called Thorns, which I really, really love, which I was actually discussing with the other guy that was just here. I also have volume 1 of the complete Conan the Barbarian series because I love Howard. Come on, I love him. He's again another foundational writer in the fantasy genre, which you might have guessed I rather love. Shakespeare wrote fantasy too. Come on, Tempest, Midsummer Night's Dream. In a way, he also invented that genre. But I've also got some comics with me because I'm a big comic book nerd. So I've got some Batman with me and some Hellboy and what else have I got? What else did I bring with me? Oh, a book by Haggard called She, which is another great fantasy. It's a kind of late Victorian, early 20th century novel about, well, just all sorts of crazy things, but it's about, you know, a man who's destined to be in love with a goddess. And life is not easy when that's your destiny, trust me. Highly recommended book, by the way, if you like the kind of good old ripping yarn adventures that deal with kind of supernatural themes. And what else do I have? I think that's about it. That's about it, because I'm only here for 3 days, so that's about all I can get through in 3 days.
That's all I can fit in my suitcase right now. What do you think about Twilight? I have to ask. In general.
Does one even think about Twilight? Is it the kind of thing one thinks about?
Some
I don't think about it. I think, am I allowed to be lewd?
Yeah.
Well then, to be perfectly fair, I am simply not the audience for that book. That is the nice way of saying I think they're shit. I haven't seen the movies. I don't want to see the movies. I know ahead of time. I'm a fair judge of character when it comes to that sort of thing, and I know that these are just not going to be characters that speak to me. Yeah. They're not going to relate my experience. I cannot, for example, imagine a vampire being bestowed with the gift of immortality and spending it in high school. Makes no sense to me whatsoever. So I just don't. I don't want to get inside that character's head, frankly, because I disagree with their lifestyle choice. But I think there's a wonderful comedian whom I'm very fond of, Dylan Moran. So I'm paraphrasing him with this, but his shtick by saying this. But I'm not suggesting that Twilight is a bad book. All I'm suggesting is that if you put me on a trampoline at the bottom of an empty elevator shaft with an ink soft broom shoved up my ass, I could accidentally write a better book on the goddamn wall. So that's what I think of Twilight.
I'm going to ask you one lower. What do you think of 50 Shades of Grey?
Oh, God. I think 50 Shades of Grey is... It makes me sad that people read that. And maybe I'm jaded. I have read parts of it because I've done, like, you know, after dark panels and conventions where they have us read excerpts.
Oh,
and even
God.
the excerpts, and I'm thinking, and my first thought is really not, wow, this is really low writing. This is like a Dick and Jane book for bored 40-something housewives whose husbands just don't know how to satisfy them. And this is sad, really, but it's maybe this just jaded part of me is reading this going, what's the big deal? What's so like risque about what they're doing? This is, wow, I must be really far out ahead of everybody, or I just must be a cynical, perverted son of a bitch. But yeah, 50 Shades of Grey. Oh, I can't wait for this juvenile literature thing. Because juveniles don't read them, adults read them.
Yeah, it's a little sad.
You know.
It's a bunch of grown women lusting over a teenage boy who's
right. Now, if you want to go back and read books that you read as a kid because you want to recapture something that you've since lost, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to go read a piece of juvenile literature that you never read as a child, that you want to read now because you just want to turn your brain off, I don't understand why you would waste the time. Reading is, why waste the time? It's like going to all the trouble of making a really nice meal just so you can throw it the hell away. I don't understand that. Yeah. And the whole juvenile literature thing, society as a whole would probably, I like to think, still frown upon someone who in their 40s would hop the fence and play on a playground with a bunch of 8th graders. Why don't we frown upon people that read their books? Anyway, that's me being difficult. I'm an asshole when it comes to that sort of thing.
It's a shame that we are out of time. I just want to keep talking to you.
I know, right? This is fun, really fun.
Thank you so much.
No problem, man. My pleasure.
Such an enjoyable one.